Hello, Dr. Cisse covering anatomy and physiology. Today we'll talk about the brain. First, let's do a little review. The human body has 11 organ systems. One of them is the nervous system. The nervous system is divided into two parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system has two organs, the brain and the spinal cord. And the peripheral nervous system has all the nerves. Some of them come out of the brain. We call them cranial nerves. There are 12 pairs of those. Some of them come out of the spinal cord. We call them spinal nerves. There are 31 pairs of those. Today we'll talk about the central nervous system because we're going to talk about the brain. Let's look at the picture here. You see the frontal, the anterior part is called the rostral, and the back is called caudal. You see this big thing on top that usually you think about brain. When you think about brain, that's what you think about. That is called the cerebrum. The cerebrum. Below it, you see the cerebellum. The cerebellum. Then, at the bottom of the cerebrum and cerebellum, and rostrally, you have the brain stem. The brain stem. Then, of course, superiorly, you see the temporal lobe, which is below the temporal bone. And then you see some bumps and some grooves here. The bumps are called gyri, one gyrus. And then the grooves are called sulci, or one sulcus. You have lateral sulcus here, there's a big one you see, and then the central sulcus you see on top here dividing rostral and caudal. What is the function of the brain? Motor control. When you decide to do something like you move your hand, controlling your muscles, you use your brain. Sensation, you feel with your brain. Emotion, you emotionally feel, like you feel sad, happy with your brain. And your thought, when you think about something, it's with your brain. Again, let's look at the picture. You see the brainstem, right? At the bottom, you see inferior, you see the spinal cord, the cerebellum, and the cerebrum. How is the nervous system developed? It's developed from the ectoderm, which is one of the germ layers during embryo development. At day 19, the embryo forms a neural plate. It's kind of flat. That plate kind of goes in and becomes a groove, and it finally closes to become a fold and a tube. And that tube developed to be the brain and the rest of the nervous system. You see the nervous system, you see the different areas. You see the prosencephalon, the mesencephalon, and the rhombencephalon. These are different vesicles, just like different bags that form from the tube. Those bags become 5 secondary vesicles that will develop to become the brain. So the front will be the forebrain, the mid part will be the midbrain, and the back will be the hindbrain, just behind. So the forebrain is made of the telencephalon, which become the cerebral hemisphere. See, the cerebrum is divided into hemispheres, hemi, half, sphere, circle. And the diencephalon, which has an extension that becomes your eye. That's why I say the eye is part of your brain. Then we have the midbrain in the middle, and the hindbrain, like the behind, which is the metencephalon, that will become the pons and the cerebellum, and the myelencephalon, which will become what? The medulla oblongata. So basically, the brain has 3 major parts. The cerebrum, which is the big part, the cerebellum, which is the next big one, but it has half of the neuron of the brain. And then the brainstem is whatever is left out after you remove the cerebrum and the cerebellum, which is made of what? The diencephalon, the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Here you see the brainstem, the cerebrum on top, the big one, and the cerebellum, which means small cerebrum, on the back. Now, the brain is covered by layers. We call them meninges. That's why when somebody has infection of those meninges, we say meningitis. 3 layers after the bone, the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. You see, the pia mater is very soft. Pia means soft. The dura means hard. So you got the 3 layers covering the brain. You see some kind of space between them, right? So the brain is really well-protected organ. Now, let's talk about the 3 parts of the brain. You got the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Below, inferiorly, you have the spinal cord. So the cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem are the 3 parts of the brain. So the cerebrum is big, the cerebellum is smaller, and the brainstem is whatever is left holding them together. So what is the brainstem? The brainstem has four major parts: the diencephalon, the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Again, look at them here: the diencephalon, the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So you see how the medulla, when you go inferiorly, you just go to the spinal cord. That's why they kind of transition. Anything that has to go through the brain has to go through the medulla, because you can't go to the brain, to the cerebrum or cerebellum, without going to the medulla. So it's like medulla is like a connection between your brain and the spinal cord. Let's look at the four parts of the brainstem. The brainstem. You have the diencephalon. You see the thalamus. We talked about the thalamus and hypothalamus, remember? And then you have the midbrain. So you see the diencephalon is in blue, right? It has thalamus and it has mammillary bodies. We'll talk about this when we get there. And the midbrain in the middle here, the pons and the medulla. All the things that are sticking out here, these yellow things, are the cranial nerves. These cranial nerves, we'll talk about them in a separate video. We'll see they do a specific job for each part of your body. Some of these, look at the name for them. You got the optic nerve that tells you to go to the eye. Oculomotor, telling you it moves your eye. Trochlea, the same thing. Trigeminal, you'll see the name. Abducens, facial nerve, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory. So you'll see the different, we'll talk about this in different, but it tells you that these cranial nerves come out of the brain. Again, the medulla, pons, midbrain, and diencephalon are the four parts of the brainstem. Let's talk about the medulla oblongata. You'll see structure called pyramids, olive, and gracili and cunate fasciculi we talk about when we talk about the spinal cord, remember? And then the cranial nerves. You see the picture? We have medulla oblongata here, the whole thing. First, let's talk about the pyramids. Descending corticospinal tract. Remember the tract that comes down to tell you what to do to move your muscle. Comes through the pyramid. Then we talk about the cunate and gracile ascending tract. When we talk about the spinal cord, we say 75 north, 85 north. The road, the track will take from your body to go to your brain will go through the medulla. So it kind of makes sense, of course, because it's between the two. What about the pons? The word pons means a bridge. The pons has ascending sensory tract and descending motor tract as well. Of course, like I said, they connect the two, so it makes sense. So they also have reticular formation that will control what your sleep, respiration, and posture. Look at the cranial nerve that come out of it, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So the pons, like I said, it's a bridge connecting what the part of the brain in the front to the cerebellum. It has peduncles. Peduncles mean what? Little feet. Superior, middle, and inferior. It's part of the fourth ventricle also. What about the midbrain? Coming from the mesencephalon. It has a structure called the tectum and the cerebral peduncle, right? So they anchor the cerebrum to the brainstem. So the midbrain is like a connection between the two. Let's talk about it here. It has something called superior colliculus and inferior colliculus. Oh, look at that, the peduncles, right? And here we have the cerebral aqueduct. We'll talk about this in detail, but now I just want you to kind of get the name, be familiar with the name. And then the last one, the diencephalon. It has the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. The diencephalon. It has the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. So what is the reticular formation? It's like a loose web of gray matter. To conclude this lecture, we talk about the brain. We said the brain is very complex. So the reticular formation is like an extension of connecting every part of your brain. What does it do? It controls the somatic control. It does the somatic control, the cardiovascular, the pain modulation, sleep and conscious habituation, just to show you that the brain is not something separate where everything is done in one little part. The whole thing is connected because the brain is connected by this reticular formation where you have projection from different neurons going into different parts of the brain to connect everything in your body. What about the cerebellum? The cerebellum we talk about is the back part, is the second biggest part, but it has 50%. It also has gyri, sulci, and fissure. The cerebellum has peduncle because we talk about little feet connecting the two parts of the brain. Inferior peduncle, middle peduncle, superior. It's like the peduncle connecting the two parts of the brain. It also has the arbor vitae. Let's talk about the cerebrum now. We say that cerebrum has gyri, sulci, right? The corpus callosum. The corpus callosum kind of connect the two hemispheres, the two parts of the brain. Look at this one. We have the longitudinal fissure that separate the two hemispheres. You see the sulci and the gyri. Look at the gyri. The gyri are the bump, the sulci are the grooves. The corpus callosum connecting the left and the right hemisphere of the cerebrum. The surface anatomy of the brain, again, you see the gyri, the lateral sulcus, the central sulcus. You can pause the video and watch this. And then you see the medial aspect of the brain. From here, you can tell the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. In the middle, you see the diencephalon right here. In the very end, between the two parts of the brain, you have a hole, you have a bag, it calls a ventricle. This is the third ventricle here, right here, inside the diencephalon. So the gray matter and white matter, we talked about this before. We say the gray matter is where the neurosoma are, and the white matter or the bundle of axon, just like in the spinal cord, right? The neurosoma and the dendrite. So it makes the gray, what makes the gray matter gray again? The cell bodies. What makes the white matter white? The axon terminal of the neuron. So look at the gray matter here, right? You see the white matter and the gray matter. So the gray matter here is on top on the cortex. In the spinal cord is the opposite. Remember, the gray matter used to be the butterfly inside the middle. So let's end with the four ventricles of the brain. We have two lateral ventricles, one third ventricle, and a fourth ventricle. So you have four of them. Two lateral, third, and fourth ventricle. All right, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in class.